Suffering. We fear it. We run from it. Yet it carves itself into the soul, leaving behind something deeper than pain, something that lingers long after the wounds have healed. This is the paradox of suffering. While we try to avoid it at all costs, it is often the very thing that shapes us, forces us to grow, and awakens our deepest strength. Dostoevsky, a man who lived through horrors few can imagine, knew this paradox all too well. In 1849, at the age of 27, he was sentenced to death for his involvement in a political conspiracy. For months, he awaited execution, only to receive a last-minute pardon, sparing his life but sending him to endure years of forced labor and exile in Siberia. In the darkest moments of his suffering, Dostoevsky discovered something profound: that suffering itself was not merely a curse, but also a gateway to a deeper understanding of the human spirit. It was not in escaping pain that one found meaning, but in confronting it, embracing it, and allowing it to transform you. As he would later write, "The darker the night, the brighter the stars. The deeper the grief, the closer is God." But why does this paradox exist? Why does suffering seem to be linked so intricately to the search for meaning? We tend to view suffering as something to be avoided, an obstacle to our happiness. But what if it's the very thing that defines us? What if, in embracing our suffering, we find a path toward transcendence? Dostoevsky found his meaning not in freedom, but in the years spent in torment. Through those years, he was reborn. He was forged in the flames of his own despair, and from that, he emerged with a deep understanding of what it means to be truly alive. The central question then arises: can we too find meaning in our suffering, or will we allow it to break us? Dostoevsky suggests that we must not flee from pain, but embrace it, for it is in the dark moments that the stars begin to shine the brightest. And in those stars, perhaps we find our true purpose. Suffering, it seems, has always been a central theme in the history of philosophy. The great thinkers have not only pondered its existence, but have also sought to understand its role in the human experience. Nietzsche, in his work Thus Spoke Zarathustra, famously declared, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." This simple yet profound statement encapsulates the core of his philosophy. That meaning can be found in the face of suffering, but only if one has a clear purpose. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, echoed Nietzsche's sentiment, yet he experienced it firsthand. Frankl observed that those who endured the horrors of the concentration camps were not necessarily the strongest or the most physically capable, but those who had a sense of purpose, something to live for beyond mere survival. He wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. Frankl's words were born from experience, from watching countless individuals confront the unimaginable, and through their purpose, endure. Dostoevsky himself shared Frankl's belief that suffering was not only inevitable, but it was necessary. His works reveal a deep understanding of the human capacity for suffering, but they also emphasize the redemptive potential within that suffering. He writes in The Brothers Karamazov, "Man is not born for happiness. He earns it through suffering." The idea that happiness must be earned, not given, is central to understanding the human condition according to Dostoevsky. But what does it mean to earn happiness? And why is suffering the price? It is not just that suffering is inevitable. It is that suffering provides a pathway to deeper truths about ourselves. Nietzsche understood this well when he spoke of the Übermensch, the person who transcends suffering, not by avoiding it, but by transforming it into something greater. Similarly, Frankl's logotherapy was founded on the idea that suffering, if it can be given meaning, becomes a powerful force for growth. The question then becomes, if suffering is inevitable, how do we make sense of it? How do we find meaning in pain? Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Frankl all point us toward the same answer: through purpose. Suffering is a crucible in which meaning is forged, but only if we find something to live for. If we can make sense of our pain, we can endure almost anything. There is something uniquely destructive about the way great intelligence and deep emotion collide in the human soul. The more we understand, the more we feel, and with it comes a heightened sensitivity to suffering. Those who experience the world with great depth are often the same ones who feel the weight of it most acutely. This is not a new idea. Think of the tortured geniuses of history. Vincent van Gogh, whose profound artistic vision was accompanied by an almost unbearable inner turmoil. Nietzsche, whose philosophical genius was marred by madness. Dostoevsky himself, whose understanding of the human condition came at the cost of his own sanity at times. These men were not merely intelligent, they were deeply emotional, and it was this intensity that made their suffering so profound. The question that arises is, why is it that those with the deepest hearts and sharpest minds seem to suffer the most? Why is pain more inevitable for the gifted? And can such suffering ever be redeemed? Dostoevsky's works wrestle with these questions, and his characters reflect his own internal battles. Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment believes that he is above the moral laws of society, yet he is consumed by guilt and anguish. Ivan Karamazov, in The Brothers Karamazov, rejects the idea of a benevolent God because of the suffering he sees in the world, yet he is torn apart by the very rejection he clings to. These characters grapple with a deep sense of injustice and helplessness, yet through their pain, they are ultimately led to a form of self-awareness and redemption. Pain is not just the result of intellectual understanding. It is the birth of self-awareness. It is the moment when the mind confronts the depths of existence and realizes the full weight of what it means to live. And yet, it is in this moment, this abyss, that something profound can emerge. For those who can endure, suffering can become a catalyst for transformation. There is a harsh reality that we must confront. It is easy to denounce the evildoer. It is far harder to understand him. History is filled with figures who suffered because they were misunderstood, misrepresented, or vilified. Joan of Arc was burned at the stake as a heretic, only to be declared a saint centuries later. Galileo was imprisoned for teaching the truth, his work suppressed for challenging the religious and political powers of his time. Dostoevsky himself was condemned as a traitor, his writings censored for their radical ideas. Each of these figures embodies a pattern in history, a pattern of scapegoating those who challenge the status quo, those whose suffering is not recognized for the wisdom it may contain. But what happens when society begins to understand the why behind the suffering? What happens when we look beyond the surface and see the depth of human experience beneath? Perhaps then, we would see that suffering, even in its most extreme forms, is not something to be feared or condemned. It is something to be understood. The mystery of human existence lies not in staying alive, but in finding something to live for. In this search for meaning, suffering is not an enemy to be conquered, but a companion to be understood. If suffering is inevitable, then the only question that remains is, what will we do with it? Dostoevsky suggests that the human journey is not about avoiding suffering, but about finding meaning in it. It is in the depths of despair that one might come closest to understanding the mysteries of existence. Just as a sculptor chisels away at a block of marble to reveal the form within, we too must allow suffering to shape us, to carve away the excess and reveal the core of who we are. In the darkest moments of life, when it feels as though all hope is lost, it is essential to remember that suffering does not define us. It refines us. It is through hardship that we discover the true breadth of our strength and resilience. The mystery of the human experience is not in staying alive, but in finding something to live for. It is the pursuit of purpose that allows us to transcend our pain and rise above it. Frankl's teachings resonate deeply with this truth. Having endured the brutalities of Auschwitz, he realized that even in the worst of conditions, those who had a reason to live were the ones who survived. Suffering was inevitable, but it was their response to suffering that determined their fate. It was not the absence of suffering that brought meaning, but the presence of a higher calling, a reason to bear the pain. This higher calling, this reason for living, can come in many forms. For some, it may be a love for a family or a cause. For others, it may be the pursuit of knowledge or creativity. Regardless of what it is, it must be something that transcends the pain and provides a sense of direction in the midst of chaos. When we have a why, a reason to endure, know how, becomes too great a challenge. The idea that happiness is earned through suffering is not a romanticization of pain, but an acknowledgement of its transformative potential. Suffering has the power to teach us more about ourselves than any success or comfort could. It strips away our illusions and forces us to confront the truth of our existence. And in this confrontation, we discover the real meaning of life, not in the absence of pain, but in our ability to navigate through it, to transcend it, and to find something greater on the other side. As we stand on the precipice of the unknown, staring into the abyss of our own suffering, we must remember that the stars shine brightest in the darkest of nights. It is in the depths of our grief that we draw closest to the divine, and it is in the very nature of our suffering that we find the potential for redemption. Dostoevsky's life and writings remind us that suffering is not merely a burden to bear, but a crucible in which our greatest truths are forged. Nietzsche's philosophy calls us to embrace our pain, to transform it into strength, and to find our purpose within it. Frankl, having lived through the unspeakable horrors of war, shows us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure, if only we have a reason to live for. In the end, it is not about avoiding suffering or seeking happiness without cost. It is about finding meaning in the struggle, discovering our purpose through pain, and understanding that suffering, while inevitable, can lead us towards something greater than we ever imagined. So as we walk through the shadows, let us keep our eyes on the stars. Let us keep moving forward, knowing that even in our darkest hours, the light we seek is within our grasp, waiting to illuminate the path toward meaning, toward purpose, and toward redemption. Farewell for now. Let us carry these thoughts with us into the world where suffering may await, but so too does the possibility of transformation. May we find our why and walk the path of meaning, no matter how difficult the journey may be.